You've heard of the biblical principle of a wife's submission, but what does that look like practically?
Listen in and we'll give you 7 tips on how you can build your submissive help as a wife in the home.
Welcome back to The Biblical Couple, where we help you walk with God in your marriage. If you want to learn the definition of submission in marriage, then check out a video that we did previously right here. But today, we're going to be talking about the practical application of how to live out that submission in marriage, specifically in the home.
Okay, and we know that might sound outdated and possibly misogynistic, but it is actually not, because that's a clear teaching of Scripture and what God finds as precious in Titus 2, 3-5.
Yeah, Titus 2, 3-5 is instruction to older women to guide younger women in how to love their husbands and to be good helpers in the home. Specifically, verse 5 gives instruction for younger women to be sensible, pure workers at home. And I know that may sound bristling to the modern ear, but just think about the way that a godly wife will love the design of God and the position that God's given to her, and that she will love her family and her home and her children and especially her husband so much that she would want to serve the Lord by serving them.
And that leads us to tip number 1, which is to revel in your role.
Yeah, you really want to revel in your role, love your role, embrace your role. Don't just perform it as something perfunctory and doing it reluctantly, but you really give it 110% because you know that that's how you're going to honor the Lord. I remember back when we were dating, we had a very superficial understanding of roles and complementarianism, and that just came out because I literally texted Joanna before, back when we were dating, like, oh, are you complementarian? Kind of like just like checking it off the box sort of a thing. And it was just really odd. And of course, back when we were dating, it's not like we had husband and wife roles where Joanna had to submit to me. But yeah, we just had a very superficial understanding of it.
Yeah, so speaking of that texting story, I specifically remember like pacing around my mom's kitchen and I was typing out my answer and I was like, okay, yes, I know this is the correct answer. Complementarianism. I was like even checking articles as like sources to make sure I was correct and on point. And I was like, okay, he's gonna fall for me.
It works, but it's not necessarily the right way to do it.
No, it's not. I wouldn't do it that way.
And for those of you who haven't seen the previous video, which again you can see right here, complementarianism is just believing in God-designed complementary gender roles.
Yes, so speaking of complementarianism, that superficial understanding of it really showed itself when we were dating. There was one time I remember specifically being in Sheng's apartment. Don't worry, his apartment mate was there, so it wasn't just the two of us alone. But I was preparing some Thai basil chicken, and at first I was really excited to cook it because I know that Sheng really liked Thai food. And so I started cutting away the chicken while Sheng was working on some lesson prep or something. And over time, I was cutting away the chicken fat, and I was like, oh, my neck hurts, oh, my back hurts, and I was like, oh, I have to keep cutting this chicken fat. And I was just grumbling in my heart. And of course, we were dating, so it doesn't mean like I had to cook for him like a wife would be willing to do. But I didn't have a deep understanding of living out that principle and just kind of checked it off and said, yep, I believe in complementarianism without actually trying to practice it.
Exactly. So super important to have that heart check for yourself. Are you reveling in your role? Or husbands who are watching this, does your wife really have that deep heart understanding and appreciation of her role? Is she reveling in her role? Because it's so easy to just be superficial, giving that mental assent without the actual substance of it.
And to my fellow ladies out there, God doesn't view this as invisible work or grunt work, right? The culture has indoctrinated our minds thinking that you should rise above the menial tasks and that housework is beneath you and just do what you love. Of course, there's nothing wrong with doing what you love. We should have the right perspective though, and that is God's perspective on joyfully being workers at home. So 1 Peter 3:4 talks about how when a wife submits to her husband with a gentle and quiet spirit, which is an imperishable quality before God, that is truly precious to God. And I don't know about you, but I want to be precious in God's sight. And when we think about Christ and his example coming to the earth to serve and not to be served in Matthew 20:28, that truly is our example of humility and how to serve our family in submission and being workers at home. And that's just amazing that God gives us that privilege to do that.
Awesome. So if you have tip number 1 down, which is to revel in your role, it logically leads to tip number 2, which is don't force your husband to do things around the house that you don't want to do. What are some of the errands that you love the least, that you pretty much hate around the house? Is it washing the dishes, or
Taking out the trash,
changing the diaper,
scrubbing grout?
scrubbing grout? Yeah, whatever it might be, right? I mean, naturally husbands are stronger and more strapping and brawny and so muscular,
That's
pretty
just
much.
how God made them.
Yeah, exactly. 6-packs all the time. And so maybe your husband has more strength and naturally he's going to be more able-bodied to do some things around the house. But you need to assess your heart where you're not actually just procrastinating and pushing things onto him because you selfishly don't want to do it, right?
Makes sense.
Makes sense.
And that leads us to tip number 3, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. And we get that from Proverbs 31, verse 17 and verse 19. And maybe you're thinking, oh, Proverbs 31, woman, I don't want to live in anybody's shadow. Okay. This is a noble woman that God finds as precious. Don't you want to be like a noble woman like that? And God wouldn't put that there for no reason.
Exactly. This woman, it says she fears the Lord and she shall be praised. Verse 30. Do you want to be praised by the almighty, omnipotent, all-knowing God? I think you do. So you want to be strong. In verse 17, like what Joanna said, she girds herself with strength and she makes her arms strong. You know, she's all fit because of all of the hard work that she does. She's not just rocking the Lululemon and doing the yoga and everything so that she can show off her bod and get on the IG and, you know, selfie it up or anything. It's not for vain reasons. It's because she's serving her family. She gets all toned up because of that. In verse 19, like she mentioned, it says she stretches out her hands to the distaff and her hands grasp a spindle. And so basically she's working and she's weaving either wool or flax to make clothing. Oh my goodness.
For her family.
Yeah, and that's how she getting swole. You don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, because I know husbands and wives, we get so used to our technological age where we're just used to doing all this stuff and like, I'm gonna serve my family through spreadsheets or whatever. But don't be afraid to get in there and get that clean and do that elbow grease, you know, wax on, wax off, and actually putting in that sweat where you're feeling good serving the family with actually your physicality and your energy. Time for tip number 4. I don't know why I did that. Well, tip number 4 is to discipline your sleep schedule for the benefit of your family. That's one really cool practical way that you can be submissive to your husband, because even though you are working in the home, maybe you are a full-time stay-at-home mom, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing the work of the Lord. If you are getting up at like 12 p.m., all of a sudden breakfast forcibly has turned into lunch, and you're just like half the day is gone. Like, that's not productive and that's not a wise use of time. So to discipline the self, and I know husbands and wives both got to work on that. Amen to that. I know I feel myself needing that as well. But look at this example. Proverbs 31 verse 15 says, she rises also while it is still night and gives food to her household and portions to her maidens. And then verse 18, it says, she senses that her gain is good, her lamp does not go out at night. So she rises while it's still nighttime, so it's really early in the morning. And then when it's actually nighttime, her lamp still doesn't go out. This woman is ready to give up her comfort, give up some shut-eye, and to really stretch herself and be uncomfortable for the sake of her family, for the sake of serving them. And that's not to say you don't get your physical rest, but that you see that willing servant heart here. That's super good example, really practical.
Tip number 5 is think ahead for the needs of your family. So we get that from Proverbs 31:21. She's not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. As winter rolls around, she's not afraid of the snow because she's already prepared clothing that's ready for the snow. And so maybe for today's day and age, well, we live in San Diego, we don't get any snow at all, but maybe your husband has a really long work day and you already know that, so maybe you prepare extra snacks for him to be able to be fed. Or maybe you guys are going on a camping trip and you know that there are going to be a lot of mosquitoes, so you bring some mosquito repellent and you bring sunscreen because you don't want your family to burn and get eaten alive by mosquitoes. So just think ahead and be thoughtful about how you can serve your family. Tip number 6 is try to grow in practical homemaking skills such as cooking, cleaning, sewing, finances. And you know, for cooking, Growing up, I really loved watching cooking shows. I just loved it. Whenever it was on TV, I would just watch it. And I think the Lord really used that to be able to help me understand the principles behind cooking, so that now as a wife, I really implemented that, and it's really helped me grow and advance in my skills in cooking. Sewing, on the other hand, I'm not that great at. I learned how to sew first in middle school or something, and it's been a long time since I've actually sewn something like of tangible quality, like piece of clothing. But it's just a really helpful skill to have that I can use, like for instance, if Shang's button falls off or Samuel's clothes have a hole and I can stitch a little thing on it, a patch, then that would be really helpful to serve my family in those skills.
Yeah, Proverbs 31:16 talks about this Proverbs 31 woman. She considers a field and buys it. From her earnings, she plants a vineyard. So just look at how smart, intelligent, and enterprising she is. She's considering a field and buying it. She understands those finances like Joanna was talking about. And she's always thinking about, how can I make the right investments to be able to build and serve my family in the long haul? You can see how she's thinking about how to build and develop her skill set to better serve the family. And that's exactly what this tip is all about. And the seventh and final tip is to work with delight. Proverbs 31 verse 13 says that she works with her hands in delight. And that is the most important thing. Because at the end of the day, it's not really what she puts on the table and how good the recipe is. And it's not really about how clean the house is, but it's just how much she delights in serving her family and in serving the Lord. That kind of delight, that kind of consistent smile on the wife's face is what lifts up the entire atmosphere of the home and brings so much comfort to the husband's heart and inspires the admiration of her children.
And we see that same attitude in verse 30 that says, "Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised." And I think a lot of us know that verse, but the heart and the attitude of that woman is really what is admirable, because she fears the Lord. And you know, us wives, we could be vacuuming with a grumbling attitude, or even just vacuuming for our own sake because it just gives us a peace of mind that it's clean and spotless, when we're not actually doing it for the Lord. And so again, that attitude and heart that we have that fears the Lord is really what is pleasing to God.
There you have it, guys. 7 tips on how to practically submit in marriage in the sphere of the home. We hope that you enjoyed the video. Definitely share it with all of the married couples that you know, and hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Definitely subscribe, hit the bell button so you get notifications, because we're gonna keep talking about submission and what it practically looks like. See you guys in the next one.